This video analyzes the game played between Spielmann, who played with the white pieces, and Wahl, who played with the black pieces. The code of the opening used was C01. This opening is called the French defense, exchange variation. Result: white won the game. What is the first move of the white player? White, pawn moves to e4. This move accomplishes a great deal. 1. A pawn is fixed in the center of the board. 2. The pawn exerts a grip on d5 and f5, and keeps black's pieces from settling on those squares. 3. White's queen and bishop immediately have breathing space. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to e6 with several objects in view. 1. To prevent white from dictating the opening. After the conventional reply 1 black e5, white can play the Ruy Lopez, the Giuoco Piano, the Scotch, the Vienna game, or a dangerous gambit of some sort. Another is that black's cramped position may tempt white into a disastrous premature attack. A third is that the pawn at e6 supports an advance by 2 black d5, an attack on the e-pawn which might wrest the initiative. The French defense is not to be underestimated. It conceals a great deal of dynamic energy behind a modest facade. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to d4. It's worthwhile to establish one pawn in the center, then keeping 2 pawns there should double the benefits. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to d5. Black gives his queen more scope and challenges the center. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to c3. Clearly an excellent response, as the knight develops to its proper square, protects the e-pawn, and bears down on d5. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight moves to f6. Black in turn brings his own knight to its strongest position with gain of time, a further attack on the e4 pawn. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn from file e takes at d5. Many players prefer to add to the pressure by 4. Bishop moves to g5, which develops a piece and renders one of the enemies impotent, rather than exchange pawns, which relaxes the tension. Spielmann, who likes wide open positions, clears away a couple of pawns to give his pieces more room for their activities. Which move is better? Which should you play? The answer is, play the move that you like, the one that best suits your style and temperament. If you are a careful, cautious player who knows the full value of a pawn, that each one is a potential queen, and that the loss of a pawn may be the loss of the game. Stick to 4. Bishop moves to g5 and the openings of positional chess, the Ruy Lopez, the Queen's pawn openings, the Reti, and the English. On the other hand, if you prefer daring, adventurous chess, and a pawn is simply a barrier to the sweeping onrush of an attack by your pieces, play openings which allow scope for your imagination, the Evans, Danish, Kings and other gambits. The best openings to play are the ones you are most at home in. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn from file e takes at d5 better than taking with the knight. Black keeps a pawn in the center and frees his c8 bishop. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to g5. White pins the knight and threatens to break up black's game by 6. Bishop takes at f6. Pawn from file g takes at f6, 6. Black queen takes at f6 loses the d5 pawn, when black is left with a weak doubled pawn. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, bishop moves to e7. The simplest way of unpinning the knight. Moving the bishop only one square may not seem much of a move, but it complies with the first law of rapid development: get your pieces off the back rank. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to d3. This bishop stand is aggressive, especially against kingside castling. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight moves to c6. This knight's debut is even more menacing, as it threatens to lake the d-pawn. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight from file g moves to e2 after the customary development 7. Knight moves to f3, black pins the knight by 7. Black bishop moves to g4 and again threatens the d-pawn. White could save the pawn, for instance by 8. Bishop moves to e2, but would lose the initiative. After the next move, if black pins the knight by 7, black bishop moves to g4, 8. f3 repels the bishop and causes it to lose time retreating. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight moves to b4, intending to get rid of a dangerous enemy piece and also to assure himself of a little advantage in keeping both his bishops. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to g3, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been bishop moves to b5 check. Now we see another reason for developing the knight to c2. White wants to anchor a piece at f5, a dominating position for a knight or a bishop. A piece need do no more than just stand there and look menacing to rattle the opponent. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight takes at d3 check, mission accomplished. Black has a slight technical superiority in retaining two long-range bishops against white's knight and bishop, but black. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, queen takes at d3 black at the cost of a loss of time. Black has made 3 moves with the knight to exchange it for a bishop that moved only once. More than that, his knight came off the board completely, while the bishop left a piece in its place. The result is that white has 4 active pieces in play against 2 of black's. White is also prepared to castle on either side and mobilize both rooks quickly. Whatever advantage exists is there for white's. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to g6, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been castles on the king's side. This pawn move prevents white from placing his knight at f5, but it creates an organic weakness in black's position, one that is irremediable. The squares f6 and h6, no longer guarded by the pawn, are weak and remain so permanently. Notice that the pawn was induced but not forced to move forward. The mere threat of an inroad by the knight was enough to influence black to make a natural preventive move. It is the sort of move 9 out of 10 players make automatically in similar situations, which is why it is important to know how to exploit its defects, for no move is weak unless proper advantage is taken of its flaws. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, castles on the king's side, no violence, please, until the reserves have been brought up. Blackburn used to say, never start an attack until your queen's rook is developed. White secures the safety of his king and gets one rook out of hiding. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to c6, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been pawn moves to h6, strengthens black's pawn center and opens another avenue for his queen. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, rook from file A moves to e1. White seizes the only open file, since rooks belong on open files or on files likely to be opened, and pins the bishop. It is worth noting that a pinned piece not only is unable to move but is also powerless to capture. It does not protect any other pieces, since it is completely paralyzed. Hence it follows that not only is the bishop immobilized and in danger of its life, as it may be attacked again and again, but the knight that depends on it for protection is no longer secure. Briefly, black is now threatened with loss of a piece by 12. Bishop takes at f6. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, castles on the king's side. The king takes refuge in flight, incidentally unpinning the bishop and preserving his knight. Spielmann's strategy to this point and the decisive combination that follows would have pleased Lasker, who once said, "In the beginning of the game ignore the search for combinations, abstain from violent moves. Aim for small advantages, accumulate them, and only after having attained these ends search for the combination, and then with all the power of will and intellect, because then the combination must exist, however deeply hidden." A glance shows that white has achieved the requisite positional superiority. If there is a combination to be evolved, it must be now, before black has time to reorganize his pieces for defense. Now, while he has 5 pieces actively in play against 2 of black's. Now, while he has an open file. Enough. The combination must be there. Here is white's line of reasoning: black's advance of the g-pawn has deprived the knight of stable support. It is still guarded by 2 pieces, but if the bishop were not there it would be defended only once. In fact, if the bishop were not there, the knight would be pinned and subject to an enduring attack. The bishop appears in both equations. Obviously the bishop is the culprit, and it must be destroyed. And at once, before black has time for 12. Black bishop moves to e6. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, rook takes at e7. This was a mistake. A better move would have been pawn moves to f4. When we know about the inspiring ideas, how simple the sacrifices appear, says Zenisko Borovsky. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen takes at e7. Black must recapture, leaving the knight pinned and a fine target for further attack. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, queen moves to f3, putting pressure on the pinned piece, and threatening to take the knight. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, king moves to g7. This was a mistake. A better move would have been bishop moves to g4. The king comes to the rescue of the knight. Against the alternative defense 13. Black bishop moves to f5. Spielmann had this pretty continuation 14. Knight takes at f5. Pawn from file g takes at f5. 15. Queen moves to g3, threatening mate on the move by 16. Bishop takes at f6, checkmate. 15. Black king moves to g7, or 15. Black king moves to h8. 16. Queen moves to h4. King moves to g7. 17. Queen moves to h6, check. King moves to g8. 18. Bishop takes at f6 and white wins, 16. Bishop takes at f6, check. Plus king takes at f6 17. Queen moves to h4, check. King moves to e6 18. Rook moves to e1, check. King moves to d7 19. Queen takes at e7, check. And all black's pieces come off. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight from file C moves to e4. White must keep hammering at the pinned knight, no matter how many brilliant moves he has to find. Again, white's immediate threat is simple, 15. Bishop takes at f6, check. Winning instantaneously. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn from file D takes at e4. Black must take this knight or lose his own. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight takes at e4. 3 pieces now attack the helpless knight. Chess is not for the kind-hearted, says the French proverb. White now threatens 16. Bishop takes at f6, check. Followed by 17. Bishop takes at e7. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen moves to e6, this was a blunder. A better move would have been bishop moves to f5, on 15. Black queen takes at e4. White has the pleasant choice of winning the queen by 16. Bishop takes at f6, check. Removing the protector of the queen, followed by 17. Queen takes at e4, or forcing mate by 16. Queen takes at f6, check. King moves to g8 17. Bishop moves to h6 followed by 18. Queen moves to g7, checkmate. In the last line of play, notice how white screws his pieces firmly into the 2 holes in black's position, f6 and h6, the squares no longer guarded by the g-pawn after its advance. With his last move, black saves the queen. He is still ahead in material but has a lost game, as white's pieces will insinuate themselves along the dark squares to get at the king. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop takes at f6 check. White regains a piece and limits black's king to 2 moves. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, king moves to g8, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been queen takes at f6, if 16. Black king moves to h6, then 17. Queen moves to f4, check. And mate next move. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, queen moves to f4 threatening a final invasion at h6 followed by mate at g7 triumph on the dark squares. Black, powerless to prevent mate, resigned.